Matthew 19, thanks, Michael. Hey, buddy, is where we're going to be this morning. So if you would you stand back up if you want to? Getting your up-downs in this morning. Your watch is like, you seem like you're working out. No, I'm just at church, that's all. Just reading the Bible. Matthew chapter 19, let's read this together starting in verse 1. It'll be on the screen. Now when Jesus had finished these things, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? And he answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh? So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. They said to him, then why did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? And he said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery or causes her to commit adultery. The disciples said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. And he said to them, not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this, receive it. This is the word of the Lord. Amen. You can be seated. So as reading, the scriptures are going to touch on some places of our hearts if they haven't already today, that maybe have not healed yet. And I want you to know that I know that going into it. But I have a responsibility and a joy to teach the whole counsel of the Word of God. And my belief is that God operates like a surgeon with a scalpel, not with an axe. And so he might press on tender places, but I believe it's for our healing today and not for our harm. So we're gonna walk through it, and I want you to know, I know it, and I know there's trauma. There's so many of us in the room today who have experienced the trauma of divorce, or we're currently in the midst of it. And my prayer is that the word of God through his Spirit is a balm to your soul and an encouragement, but also a challenge to you as well this morning. On the screen will be some scriptures I'm going to use this morning. I'm going to cover a good bit of them, but it's because Jesus does. And so Jesus will reference the passages in Genesis. The Pharisees reference a passage in Deuteronomy. And we're going to talk about Ephesians and 1 Corinthians as well. And so just off the bat, when we're looking at Old Testament law, we're looking at the Torah, we have to be able to put it in context. We have to be able to see the whole scope of it. Otherwise, we get some really jacked up theology about tattoos and eating fish and the whole thing. And so we need to make sure we study all this in context. But it's not any different for you and for me. So there are laws today that are on the books for us that in context are gonna make sense for us, but out of context make no sense. Did you know that in Ackworth, Georgia, you must own a rake? It is legally binding for you to own a rake. And if that's not crazy enough, let me tell you the reason why. In 1982, the city of Kennesaw enacted legislation that mandated that every homeowner own a firearm. We're in Ola, I thought I'd get more amens than what I just got right there, but I felt like you really had a chance to prove you're a country boy and you didn't do it. All right, so in 1982, that happened. Ackworth's response was, oh yeah? I see your gun law, let me make a rake law. You must own a rake in our city. The reason is to keep all the leaves, obviously, off of the sidewalks and driveways, which actually works in your favor if you slip and fall on somebody's leaves, because then you can sue them because they did not lawfully use the rake they're legally obligated to have. Did you know that in the city of Atlanta, it is illegal to tie a giraffe to a telephone pole or a street lamp? If you need to confess, we'll have pastors down here later to help you and receive your confession. In the 1800s, a circus rolled into Atlanta. And some exotic giraffes. They were showing them around, and the lawmakers were worried about the scene that was being caused. And so they made it illegal to actually tie them up in the streets and let people come and see them. So that's where that comes from. Did you know that in the state of Georgia, it's illegal to carry an ice cream cone in your back pocket? Especially on Sundays? No, I didn't mean, come on, Robert. with a Y, not an E, the day Sunday. So in the early 1900s, the 17, 1800s, this is a way that thieves would steal your horse. They would put an ice cream cone in their back pocket, and they'd walk past where you had tied your horse up. They would slowly untie the horse and just keep walking, and the horse would be drawn away by the glorious view of your back pocket full of ice cream and would follow you down the street. In fact, there was a harsher penalty for doing so on Sundays, because on Sundays, when you're wrapped up in worship of the king, is when thieves would break in and steal, and moths would destroy it, but that's when they would come in and steal your horse. So especially on Sundays, you can't carry ice cream in your back pocket. And finally, do you know it's illegal to have a donkey in your bathtub? If you need to go home right now and fix it, I understand. Just run home. And it's illegal to put a donkey in a bathtub because in 1924, all the way in Arizona, a farmer was allowing his donkey to sleep in the bathtub. And out of nowhere, a dam burst, leading to a town flood, and the donkey, still in its bathtub, was carried away and floated downstream. Come on, that's funny. Picture that. That's good stuff. That's really good stuff. And so the lawmakers in Arizona were like, this costs too much money and manpower, man. We got to do something about this rise in crime in Arizona, and so we have to do something. So then a number of states, not just Georgia, adopted this same practice so that now it is still illegal. On the books today, it's illegal to keep a donkey in a bathtub. So on the surface, like that sounds crazy, but the context, like, okay, some of it, like I can kind of get that, right? Like it kind of makes sense. In our culture, we don't quite get it. So we need to keep some of that in mind as we step into the scriptures. There's stories behind it, right? There's context. There's reasons why laws are put into place. So it's going to be important for us moving forward. Let's go to Matthew chapter 19, verse 1. When Jesus had finished these sayings, what sayings? Matthew 18, those sayings. The sayings about how you handle confrontation, how you handle when somebody has sinned against you, what forgiveness looks like, and how often you should forgive. When he finished that teaching, he made his way out of Galilee and entered the region of Judea. Beyond, or on the east side of the Jordan, large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. So remember, Jesus is making a road trip to Jerusalem, taking his disciples with him. He's on his way to the cross, and he makes a few of these stops. But remember back in Matthew 14, we looked at how King Herod had divided up his land among his sons and daughter. Do you remember this? So here you don't. So here's the map to remind you. Here's the map. All right, so he's up in Galilee, right? And that's run by King Herod's son, Herod Antipas. If you remember Herod Antipas married his aunt's sister's daughter's wife. I forget how it works, but he married somebody that's related to him. And so he marries his sister-in-law. And then, so here's the journey. Jesus and disciples are making their way down. That blue line is this Jordan River. But they make their way from Judea over, says, to the other side of the Jordan. That's where we're going to a land called Perea. Now, Perea is also run by the governor, Herod Antipas, which is fine until you realize the context of all of this. Do you remember back in Matthew chapter 14 that there was a man who had a problem with Herod Antipas marrying his sister-in-law? Do you remember this? His name was John the Baptist. And he caused such a stink that at a party, Herod Antipas' wife asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Well, she had her daughter go ask. So that's all happening. So where this is happening is in this same region where apparently speaking out against divorce and remarriage is going to get your head chopped off. That's what's important for us from Matthew here, where it is. He's back here in this place. So in Matthew 19, verse 3, the Pharisees came up to him and they tested him, or they tried to trap him. Now the Pharisees are conservative. They're not really officially in power, but they have social appeal. Like they lead socially. And they believe in what's called the tradition of the elders. So not just the written Torah, but instead what's been laid on top of that. They believe that how rabbis interpret the law actually makes it the law. The oral tradition carries, which is how we get all sorts of weird laws that they would have had back then. And so they come to Jesus and they test him and they ask him one question. Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? It's not a random question. Remember where we are regionally. This is a question. It's hotly debated, some ways because of Herod Antipas, but on top of that, because of what's being taught in the synagogues. So at this time, this is the raging debate of the day. And there's two rabbis on opposing ends of the spectrum, two popular, well-known, well-followed rabbis. There's one, his name is Rabbi Shammai, and he believes that divorce is only allowed in specific cases of adultery. You're only allowed to divorce your wife in the case of adultery. But he takes it a step further, that she is found in adultery. She's caught in adultery. So Rabbi Shammai says, listen, this is what this law is telling us. This is how we interpret it. On the other end of the spectrum is a man named Hillel, Rabbi Hillel. Saul, who had become Paul, studied under Hillel. And Hillel was one of the preeminent Jewish rabbis. And his interpretation of the law carries a lot of weight. And his view was divorce is allowed. And the phrase that he would use was any and every cause. That at any point you can divorce your wife. Now, culturally, only men can create or enact divorces. Women cannot divorce their husbands. It's only the male that can do it. And so the debate now is, well, Jesus, which one are you on? Which team are you on? Are you on team Shammai or are you on team Hillel? Where do you land here? But to help us, I want to give us some rootedness to know where it's coming from. This is Deuteronomy chapter 24. Here's one of those donkey in a bathtub kinds of laws, but we need to understand the context. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency about her or in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house. And if she goes and becomes another man's wife, so if she was married to husband one, now married to husband two, and husband two hates her, despises her, turns his back on her, and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house, or if husband two dies, who took her to be his wife, then her first husband, the one who sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. And you shall not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. Moses is about to lead his people, he thinks, across the Jordan. Joshua would do it into the promised land. This is the first real law that we have on divorce. There's one kind of similar in Exodus, but here it's particular. So the understanding is if a woman marries a man, the man divorces her, she marries another man, that man divorces her, she cannot come back to her first husband. Even if the second husband dies, she cannot. So remember, culturally, the woman is property. And she's been dismissed and sent out, doesn't get the house, doesn't get 50%, gets nothing, no income, but she does get the kids, and they go, and she finds someone else who marries her, and then he kicks her out. She's got nothing. But the law is, here's the new part of the law. You have to give her a certificate of divorce. Before this time, before Deuteronomy 24, it was just on a whim. Like you could wake up on a Thursday and be like, I'm done. And then tell her to get out, and she has to. And so Moses enacts, there's going to be some kind of work here, the certificate of divorce is put in place. But the real debate is around verse 1. And there's two phrases. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if she finds no favor, the question among the rabbis was, what does it mean to find no favor? What does that mean? But the second one is really the debate, because he has found some indecency. What does it mean to find indecency? What qualifies as indecency? How do we know that a divorce is allowed? What does it mean to find no favor in your husband's eyes? And then what does it mean that he found some indecency? And so they debated about it. Again, rabbis on either side of the spectrum asking Jesus, now, where do you land? But the problem is, even for us, in our culture, we're not real sure how to define these words. Even in our translations, we have so many varying degrees of understanding. So let me give you a few of them so you can see where it's coming from. The New Living Translation says, suppose a man marries a woman, but she does not please him. Anyone here not been pleased by your wife? Don't raise your hand, but you haven't been? Having discovered something wrong with her, dare I ask? Have you found something wrong with your wife? Okay, that's the New Living. NIV, if a man who marries a woman becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her. The Net Bible, if a man marries a woman and she does not please him because he has found something offensive in her. And the New King James, when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found, now here's what they translate, some uncleanness in her. So do you see the difficulty? Like, we don't know how to translate it. They didn't know the understanding of it. So naturally, there's debates. In fact, this phrase, found some indecency, is only used here in Hebrew literature. It's the only place we can find it, which means there's nowhere else to go to see how it's used. And so the rabbis are discussing it, and Shammai lands, he takes the phrase, found some indecency, and he uses the literal definition. Literally, it translates in Hebrew that he found a nakedness about a thing. So that's where he goes, well, nakedness about a thing, I'm gonna believe that means that you found her naked with another man. And that's where he says, so that's conservatively, that's where I land when divorce is allowed. Hillel uses a more liberal translation where it found something offensive or unacceptable, objectionable. He's like, no, I think that means there's a litany of reasons why. In fact, one of Hillel's disciples wrote a dissertation on this, and he makes the claim that a husband can leave his wife essentially because she burnt dinner. Women, how are we feeling? You feeling good? Right? So again, ends of the spectrum. Now, among the men in Matthew 19, you think they sided with Shammai or Hillel? Who'd they side with? You can say it out loud. Hillel, right? Yeah. We're like, I'm about that. So you're telling me if she gains a little weight, that's displeasing to me and I can go? Yeah. Team Hillel all day long. Yes. Right? That's the debate. But most of the men, again, very chauvinistic society, men rule the day, and so they get to decide, well, yeah, then we're going to side with Hillel. And wouldn't you know, the Pharisees is a group of men. And wouldn't you know it, man, they love them some Hillel. Goodness, they love him. They're like, yeah. And so they're asking Jesus, so which one are you on? Which side are you on? And obviously it's a lose-lose for him, right? You're not going to win this. You say Shammai, you're getting your head cut off. You say Hillel, you just made yourself a scumbag too. You're just in with the rest of them. And so Jesus, the brilliance of how, the way Jesus handles cultural debates should be an example of the way we handle cultural debates, which means we don't engage in them. We just talk about the Bible. So watch how Jesus handles this hotly debated topic. Verse 4, he answered, have you not read your Bibles? Have you not read it? They're like, we're Pharisees, bro. Yes, we've read it. Have you not read that he who created, now look at this, from the beginning made them male and female? So Jesus is not willing to engage in the divorce conversation until they have a marriage conversation. But even before they have a marriage conversation, they're gonna have a created by God conversation first. Do you see the foundation he's laying? We're so far upstream, Jesus is saying, we can't even have this conversation because we're so mistaken all the way back to the beginning. So he takes them back to Genesis. Have you not read? So he's gonna lay before them the biblical view of, first of all, humanity, and secondly, marriage, because this is where they got it wrong. This is where all the misinterpretations have happened. So he calls them back to this poem that Moses wrote, describing how everything came to be. So here's Genesis chapter 1. Here's what Jesus is referring to. So God created man, humanity, that's the word, human, in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So him and them, so him for us is singular, them is plural. That's not true in Hebrew. This is the same word. Him and them is the same word. So here's, God created humanity in his own image. In his image of God, he created humanity. Male and female, he created humanity. So let's picture what's happening. God has created one species, mankind, Homo sapien, created one. But he says that in the creating one, he created two kinds of that one, two distinct kinds, male and female. This is specifically here and also in Genesis 6, where Noah brings on two kinds of every animal, male and female. So distinctively, Genesis 1:27 is telling us about creation, about the creation of humanity. One created as two, and two comes out of the one. Do you see it? One human, male and female. We would call that binary. That's what we call that. Explicitly, male and female. If The argument is about divorce and remarriage. Jesus takes them back to the creation of mankind. But from there, after verse 27, because the understanding is that you also know verse 28, Jesus is referencing that we might know the rest of it. And God blessed them, verse 28. And God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Undisputed that God created humanity, and in that humanity created two. Of that species created two, a male and a female, distinct by chromosome, distinct by structure, distinct. And why? The question is why? Well, verse 28 answers that. Why? To be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth, for reproduction. That's why. Why are they distinctly male and female? Because they have to be to reproduce. That's why. Yes? I hope you're not learning anything. I hope this is not news to you. Okay, we're good there, yes? 2, 1 to 2, that it might procreate, it might recreate life. That's the purpose here. Now, if we stop here, it creates all sorts of issues. Because without the rest of the Bible and Genesis 2, we're left to think that the only reason there are male and female, the only reason is for sex and procreation. Yes? If we stop here, we're like, oh, I get it. Yes, I get it. He created two distinct ones that they might come together to make a bunch more of that distinct. Yes, absolutely. Yes, if we stop there. If we stop there, the role of male and female relationships is animalistic, yes? It's animalistic, it's yes. So God gave the male an excess of what's called testosterone. And this testosterone makes him see things differently than the other kind does not. And they see things differently. And they approach things very, very differently. And a lot of that approach is rooted in the testosterone. It's rooted in what makes them distinct. The estrogen makes her distinct. Testosterone makes him distinct. And the testosterone makes him feel like, I got to make more of these. How do I make more? And how do I make as many as possible, as quickly as possible? It's okay. Yes? That's what that does. That's what happens in us. There are kids here. I'm not going to go. That's what happens. So if we stop here, we're like, yeah, dude, yes, yeah. Do you get it, right? Yes, if that's the point. If we stop here, the entire point is just be like little bunnies, man. Just be like rabbits. Just do that. Fill the earth quickly and then subdue it. The problem is we have Genesis 2. And so when God, through Moses, expounds on the creation, here's now the expanse of it. Genesis 2:24. So God created them male and female in his image. Therefore, verse 24, a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to, hold fast to, be fastened to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Which changes everything. Because this is what distinguishes humans above most other created beings. It's a higher calling than just making more humans. Every other animal on the planet is wired to make more of their kind. Yes. Naturally. It's how it works. It's how we populate. But here's the distinction. That this one species in two genders actually comes back together to be fastened together to make one new flesh. And they do it by leaving their father and mother to make the one flesh. Now, do you need to leave your mother and father to make babies? No. There are plenty of high school girls living at home with babies. You don't need to leave mama and daddy to make babies, right? Just logically, you do not have to. So Genesis 2:24, the one flesh, this isn't sexual, this is covenantal. This is fastening to. We would call it monogamy. That's what we call this. So the idea in Genesis 2:24 is that we are called to rise above the animalistic behavior of making more of our kind and instead fasten ourselves to one. That in that one flesh we might make more of our kind in the covenant. Proverbs talks about it, Ephesians, Corinthians, it's all there. These are the new guidelines to rise above that. So the debate in Jesus' day in Matthew 19, rooted in Deuteronomy 24, is actually rooted back here, where Jesus gives us the ideal of marriage. The ideal is this. The ideal is one flesh. The ideal is one human of two kinds becoming one for procreation. Not one species of two kinds making a bunch of babies. There's distinction here. And the call is to rise above the animalistic behavior, the lusts inside of us. That's the call. The call is to rise up above it. Now, let me just take a second. It would be hard for me with any integrity to teach that God created more than two genders based on Genesis 1, 27 and 28. I believe it's explicitly clear. One human, two kinds. Now, we're going to read in Matthew 19 that there's some blurring there, but it's binary. There's two. And the very definition of marriage is not two humans coming together. No. It's this. It's the husband and the wife, the male and the female coming together. That's what I believe the Bible teaches. And I believe there's grace and there's mercy and there's love and forgiveness. There's all of that. But the black and white is this to me, that God created one species of two kinds to bring those two kinds back together. Not one species of one kind that they might come together. Okay. Love you. I love you. I want to teach the truth. This is where we are. So let's go back to Matthew chapter 19. So Jesus continues in verse 5. He references Genesis. So therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. And then he adds something. He adds an understanding to it in verse 6. So then, they're no longer two, but one. They aren't two parts of a whole. They're two that have become one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. Where do I land on divorce, you ask Jesus? Oh, I land where Genesis lands. That's where I land. I land in the fact that God created one human of two kinds to bring them together for a lifetime. That's what I believe. That's what Jesus says. And so if that's happened, we don't get to separate that. Now, Jesus is giving the ideal. This is the ideal, God's ideal for marriage and relationships. No longer two, but one that God has joined together. He takes them back to creation. And here's why. Because that impacts the way we view the rest of the passage. If you don't view marriage in that way, you're going to view divorce differently. If you don't move from Genesis 1 to Genesis 2, then divorce sounds silly. Like divorce, I'm just trying to make babies. Why any of it? Like, let's just live together or not. Let's just sleep together and make babies. But then you're like, why even need divorce? Because I can just throw away the old one and get the new one anyway. We need to have this foundation. So Jesus takes us back there. Ideally, it is a sacred symbol that's meant to point us to God's very nature. So then, verse 7, here's the response of the Pharisees. Well, hold on. You said we don't read. How about you? Have you read? Did you keep reading past verse 1 of Deuteronomy 24? Because Moses commanded one to give her a certificate of divorce and to send her away. Okay, all right, Pharisees. Let's see what Moses said, shall we? Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if, what? Oh, if? Oh, that sounds conditional, not like a command, right? If she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her. So the right reading of Deuteronomy 24 is not that Moses commanded divorce, but in fact, he permitted it. And what the Pharisees are doing in Matthew 19:7 sounds a lot like what the serpent does in Genesis, yes? Did God really say? So the culture, again, is that man could just leave his wife and not think anything about it. So Moses enacts a certificate of divorce to keep it from being so rampant, to care for the woman, to care for the women and the children. So Jesus' response to their question in verse 8, oh, you want to know why? Because of your hardness of heart, that's why. Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. This phrase, hardness of heart, should immediately take you back to Exodus. It's used 2 times in the book of Exodus. One, to define the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. They become heart stubborn and hard of heart, but primarily it's used to define Pharaoh and his heart. So Jesus, the kung fu master, is like, oh, why? Because you're more like Pharaoh than you are like your father. That's why. And he groups them in. You people who are following the way of Hillel, the way of this kind of any and every cause, you understand that sounds like Pharaoh? You've got a hard heart. That's why God did it. But from the beginning, it wasn't the intent. It's not the ideal. Verse 9. So I say to you, here's my answer, Jesus says. Whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and then marries another commits adultery. Some translations say, or cause her to commit adultery. Which sounds great. Except for now we're like, yeah, but what's sexual immorality? Like, what is that? What qualifies as sexual immorality? Well, the Greek word is porneia, which you would think would help us, except it doesn't, because porneia is a very broad term. Here's how D.A. Carson describes the word porneia. He says, it must be admitted that the word porneia itself is very broad. Porneia covers the entire range of such sins, sexual sins, and should not be restricted unless the context requires it. And then he goes on to say, this context does not require it. So Jesus gives a broad term. So he answers their question by not actually answering their question. He's like, oh, I believe sexual immorality is the only cause for divorce. And he would add to that later on, and Paul would add to it, there's cases where a non-Christian abandons a Christian spouse, and that's cause for divorce. We'd have conversations, but this one. So now the question for us, here's the debate in our day, or in the church at least. Well, then what qualifies as a permissible divorce? Adultery, and they would all say yes, adultery. Excessive pornography use? I don't know, does that count as sexual immorality, a sexual sin? What about like an emotional affair and not a physical affair? Can that qualify as porneia? Yeah, biblically it can. Well, what about like just reading romance novels and then thinking about that a lot instead of thinking about your husband? Well, is that sexual sin? I would argue, sure it is. But here's the problem. If the question is, how do I know when I can divorce my husband? We're asking the wrong question altogether. Because then we begin looking for that very thing. And if you're manipulative enough, you set up that very thing. The question isn't, when can I divorce my husband? The question is, what is marriage? That's the question. That's what Jesus is saying. The question isn't the debate of Hillel and Shammai. The question is, do we understand, really? Like, are we clear? Which is why Jesus takes them back to Genesis chapter 1 about what marriage is. So where does Jesus land in the debate? Well, it seems like he leans more on the side of Shammai, but not fully. But it seems like he lands more in that way. But again, if that's the question, well, when can I finally divorce her? I think you're asking the wrong question. What's crazy is that apparently Jesus had never taught on this before because the disciples are blown away by what's happening. Look at verse 10. And the disciples came to him and said, say what? If such is the case of a man with his wife, we'd rather not get married. To which the married people said, yeah. Yeah. Because in their culture, they were like, no. In their view, marriage is, she's hot, right? She's pretty. My dad likes her. Her dad likes me. They come from money. Let's get married. And if things go bad, I'll just get another one. Maybe even like to add to that, to the collection, or just exchange or whatever, right? The view was, if it goes bad, I'm out, so it's fine. And Jesus is like, listen, man, you've missed it. It's forever. Like for your entire life with this one person, two become one. And they're like, if that's the case, I'm out then. I don't want to get married. And what I love is that I think the disciples are saying something that's more true than they actually know is true. And here's what we've lost in our culture and in this day in Matthew 19. That should be our mindset. Gosh, that looks awful. That looks really hard. Yeah. You mean like forever? I'm like, yeah, forever, ever? Yeah, forever, ever? I'm sorry, Miss Jackson. I am for real. I never meant to make your daughter cry. All right. I have to be honest, I scripted that one because I knew it was coming, so I felt like that was going to be a good one. All right, so the disciples are like, but you really mean forever? And he's like, yes. And they're like, I don't know if I can do forever. And I believe, yes. Listen, if you're thinking about getting married, I want you to know it's forever. Think about it. Like, consider it. You will be with that one person longer than you've been alive. Like 4 times, 5 times longer than you've been alive, you will be with that one person. Meredith and I have just one of my favorite things we get to do together is do premarital counseling. And we do a session on what it means to fight and how to fight well. And one of the things we tell people is, listen, marriage is deciding who you're gonna fight with the rest of your life. But is that not true? That's what it is. That's not all it is, but that's what it is. So I think this response from the disciples, goodness, I wish we had more of it. Okay, so if I really understand what marriage is, then what you're saying is I need to consider the rest of my life? Yeah. Yes. And it's sad that you haven't thought about that. But culturally, why would you think about that, right? Like, why? You're already living together. You're already sleeping together. You can just exchange that anyway. There's plenty of ways to get divorced. But the ideal is this. And the disciples are like, I don't know if I can, right? Like, the disciples are like, so you mean if it gets hard, I don't get to leave? Like, we have to work out our problems? And Jesus is like, yes, please reference Matthew 18. Because context matters. So you mean if he loses his hair, I don't get to leave? Okay, but what about if he loses his job? Then can I? No. Okay, but what about, let's just say we have kids, and it gets just hard to raise kids, and we're so exhausted from raising kids, we don't have time to talk, much less be intimate, and that begins to wane. Then can I? Still no. Because marriage is one species of two kinds coming together to be one flesh forever. And the thought of the disciples is like, golly, I don't know now. I don't know. Married people, you tired? Raise your hand, are you tired being a married person? Anybody anxious? Anybody worried about your spouse and your kids? Anybody sleep on the couch in the last few months? I see that hand. Right? You have seasons of like, what have I done? What have I signed up? This is forever? Yeah. The truth is that marriage is more expensive than you could ever think. It'll cost you in every way. Now, is it beautiful and endearing and miraculous? Absolutely. And I've learned more about the Lord from the way my wife loves me than from anything else in the world. But it's not what Hallmark makes it out to be. True marriage will leave you exhausted at the end of every day. So how does Jesus respond? He's like, no, listen, that's not what I meant, guys. What I meant is it's great. Like, you should do it. His response is, yeah. And not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. Verse 12, for there are eunuchs who have been so from birth. So if it wasn't awkward enough, let's talk eunuchs for a second. Many of us don't know what a eunuch is. So a eunuch, the word comes from this culture in particular, where a king would marry a wife and then marry more wives and more and more and more. And then he would need someone to come help serve the family, make dinner, work on the land, all of that. And so they would hire servants. And so most kings would hire male servants. But kings recognized the Genesis 1:27 nature of mankind. They're like, hey, man, listen, if I put that good-looking servant around my wives, what's going to happen? And so naturally, the response was to castrate the servant. If you don't know what castrate means, Micah and Cody will be in the gathering place after the service, and they can help you. So culturally, that's what a eunuch is. That's the idea. Someone who is given to celibacy. Does that help? Okay, who is their lives, they will not have sex, cannot have sex, will not have sex, or get married or have a family. And so Jesus says, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. You'd rather be alone. And for some people, yeah, that's actually exactly what you should do. And there are some who have been that way from birth, which that'll mess with you, won't it? Like, there are some people, one species, two kinds, who can't do the things that the two kinds are supposed to do, whether it's chemical or physical. In a fallen world, that happens in the womb. And so the response there is, yeah, there's people like that, given to celibacy because they were from birth. Secondly, there are those who made eunuchs by man. We talked about that with the kings. But then Jesus drops this on them. But there are also some who have made themselves eunuchs. Well, hold on. Some who have done what to themselves now? Not that. It's the idea of a eunuch. Why? For the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Here's what's brilliant. I wish Jesus would have been like me. Like me. You know, Jesus never got married. Jesus never had sex. Jesus never had a family. And so Jesus is like, yeah, so listen, for some people, this is the calling. We would call it celibacy. Yeah. But the disciples are blown away. We're blown away. Jesus continues, let the one who's able to, I know it's heavy, let the one who's able to receive this, receive it. Okay, so why does that shock us so much? It does, doesn't it? I hope people choose to be single their entire lives. You're married and that's your question? Yeah, people choose that sometimes. Growing up in Florida, our church, we had a missionary. Her name was Edna Hooper. Never married, never had kids. She was a missionary to Thailand, and she'd come home for furlough and make the best sticky rice you've ever had for our missions conferences. When she came home, she made it a point, almost every time she came home, to take my sister and a couple of her friends out to lunch and breakfast a couple of times a week to teach them what it is to be a godly woman, what it's like to follow Jesus, and what it's like to be a missionary. And my oldest sister became a missionary largely because of the influence of Edna Hooper, a single, unwed, celibate woman. But we're like, here's the problem for us. We have so idolized, let me start at the base. We've so idolized sex in our culture that it has become the point of our existence. We live for sex. If you were a kid in the 80s and 90s when Left Behind was going around, I don't know if you remember this. This was my feeling, and maybe I'm alone in this. But I was like, Lord, I want you to come back. But listen, I need to marry somebody and have sex first, and then you can come back. Which is like, gosh, what a terrible theology that was. But we've so elevated this that to think that someone would willingly say, no, for my life, I won't. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, you don't need to have sex to have a meaningful, purposeful life. What? Yeah. Like, what if life isn't about that? Well, no, I read Genesis 1:27. Did you read 22:24 too? Did you read that? Did you read the story of Jesus? I would say he had a pretty meaningful life. We're so immersed in this culture that's so sexualized that sex is how we sell products, it's how we sell ourselves on social media. It is. It's why you use a filter, and it's why you delete all the bad pictures. It's why. Sadly, it's how we market the church. You've gotten the postcards. Sex has become the reason for living. And Jesus is like, well, what if it's not? You want to know why it sounds so crazy to be celibate? It's because we've so elevated sex as an idol. That's why it sounds crazy. And so in the church, like, we don't do that. No, not sex. You know what we do? Marriage, that's what we elevate. Like, marriage becomes the pinnacle of all creation. It becomes the reason for living. Some of you are right now trying to matchmake somebody because you think that's what will bring them contentment. You are married. You know that's not true. Right? You're like, it didn't work for me, but maybe for her it will. Maybe I just didn't find the right guy. No, it's because you cannot expect a husband to be what Jesus is. You can't. But we've made marriage the pinnacle. It's the goal. But Jesus is like, you don't even need that. You don't need marriage to have a meaningful, purposeful life. You don't. And I know it sounds crazy because of the world you're immersed in. It sounds like a donkey in the bathtub to you. That's what it sounds like. What? No, you don't. Why? Because in Jesus, you have everything you would ever need, want, and desire. And I know, gosh, I know how corny that sounds to you, but I mean it. I mean it. If you're looking for marriage to be the thing that brings you meaning and purpose, you will be sorely disappointed. The point of marriage is the same as the point of singleness and celibacy, for the kingdom of God. That's the point. That's the point. So let me speak to a few people this morning as we close. First, I want to speak to those who have been divorced. You want to know why it hurts? It's because it wasn't the ideal. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the trauma that's caused for you in the divorce, in the separating. I'm sorry. And I wish there was a way to just remove all of that, but there isn't. And it's not to say that there's not reconciliation and restoration, that you can't find purpose and meaning and life to the full. You can. But you're walking through grief and trauma from it because the way that God oriented the human heart was one flesh for a lifetime. And the brokenness of this world has broken you. So I want to encourage you in a couple of things. First is this: find some counseling, Bible-based godly counseling to walk with you through the trauma and grief of it. We offer divorce care on Wednesday nights at 6:30. And before you ask, no, we're not endorsing divorce, no. But we do want to care for people walking through. It's a real thing in our culture. It's real. You're in it. We want to help. We want to help you. So I want to say that to you. Second, I want to speak to married people. Because here's what's so sad, especially in the church. You've been married 50 years, and at this point in your life, you hate your spouse. But what you hang your hat on is, but we didn't get divorced. Can I take you back to Genesis like Jesus would? I'm not asking if you got divorced. I'm asking, are you married? That's the question I'm asking. Not do you live together, not do you share an address. I'm asking, are you married? That's what I'm asking. Not do you coexist in the same house. Not do you put up with each other. Not are you there until the life insurance kicks in. Not that. I'm asking, are you biblically married? And here's how Paul would define marriage in Ephesians 5. A man shall leave his father, mother, hold fast, cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound. And I'm saying it refers to Christ and the church. What mystery is profound? Genesis 1, making babies? That's not a mystery. That's obvious. What the mystery is that you would choose one person for a lifetime. That's a mystery. You'd even deal with stuff that comes up, like you'd work through the hard stuff. That's crazy. But why? Because it points to Jesus and the church. So here's what you need to do. Husband, love your wife as himself. And let the wife see that she respects her husband. So I'm not asking, have you not gotten divorced? What I'm asking is, are you living an Ephesians 5 marriage? That's what I'm asking. Are you married? Sure. Keep thinking because you never filed for divorce that you're in God's good graces. I'm letting you know you're not married. You're living together. You're roommates. The invitation is to this, which has to take us back to Matthew chapter 8. You got to confront. You got to work through it. And then you got to forgive 70 times 7. I want to speak to students and single adults. Marriage is not the point of your life, which means finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend is not the point of your life, which means sex is not the point. Any of your classmates, or you, who have engaged sexually, you could say the same thing, couldn't you? If you were honest, you'd be like, I still feel empty. Still feel like I haven't gotten what I needed to get out of it. So I want to give you a practical thing to do. I want you to be careful what music you listen to. And I know that sounds like 1990s youth pastor, but I'm for real. You can listen to good music. Good lyrically, not good musically. But you can listen to good lyrically, call it good, clean music. But if all it's doing is perpetuating your desire for a relationship, it's feeding you a line that will leave you disappointed. Well, it doesn't talk about sex. I'm not saying it talks about sex. What I'm saying is it makes you feel incomplete if you don't find a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and that's a lie of the enemy. So be careful. Be careful what movies you watch, what TV shows, what reality shows you watch. Be careful. Because it's feeding into a lie that sex and marriage are the supreme, and they're not. Jesus is. So find music and TV and books that point to that. I want to speak to those who would consider themselves same-sex attracted. Our view, scripturally, is that marriage and sexual relationship is off the table for you, homosexually. Purpose and meaning in your life is wide open to you. Your sexual brokenness is not that different from mine. Every single one of us in the room today is a sexually broken creature. Marriage and sex is off the table for you, much like polygamy is off the table for me. But it doesn't mean you don't have purpose and value in life. And it doesn't mean you can't love Jesus and wrestle with it. There's a same-sex attracted theologian named Sam Albury who wrote a book called Is God Anti-Gay? But recently he was called out, I think on social media, told that he was a miserable person and should just marry a man, get a boyfriend and marry him so he wouldn't be miserable anymore because his miserable single life existence. And his response was, listen, that might work for you, but I found all I need in Jesus. So yeah, love the Lord, study the Bible, worship him with all you've got. And then finally, I want to speak to those young adults who are single, or even adults, single, dating, and engaged couples. I know all your friends are getting married, and I know it feels like the world is passing you by. Jesus has not passed you by. I got married in my late 20s and had messed up some relationships before that. Just thought that's what it was going to be. And it wasn't until I gave my life wholly and completely over to Jesus that I found contentment. Whatever you think that guy is going to bring to your life when he puts a ring on it, he's not. And I want you to realize this is forever. Forever. So make sure. Please make sure. And I would also say, don't miss this season of your singleness. Don't miss it. Don't miss whether you're always single, newly single, maybe you're forever single. What a gift. I know it doesn't feel like a gift, but it's a gift. Like you're married, you don't know. I know. But I'm telling you, as a married person, what a gift it is. You know that yesterday I did nothing I wanted to do? Like, not a thing. Oh, and I loved every minute of it. I loved it all. But time is not my own, right? And it's beautiful. Like to serve my family well, I want to do that. But you've got some time on your hands to do some real damage for the kingdom of God against the enemy. Use it, man. Golly, use it. Study your Bible. Have a group of good friends who push you to know Jesus. Eat good food. Share good music. Do all of it. But not with an eye towards a spouse, with your eye on the goodness of God in the present. What you have now. What a gift you have. You know how many teenagers need your time for you to be with them? How many kids, how many adults need you to be available, and you get to be? Sweet gift. Paul says it this way in 1 Corinthians 7, I want you to be free from anxieties. An unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife. And his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed, the engaged woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. Do you see it? Do you see the division? I say this, he says, to the single person for your own benefit, not to lay restraint on you, but to promote good order, to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. Be undivided in your celibacy. And it's not a call to not have sex. It's a call to be holy. And that requires more than abstinence. So the invitation is there to seek him. I don't know where you find yourself here today, but I'm telling you, a lot of our frustration and pain and trauma comes from C.S. Lewis would call disordered loves. We've placed the love of marriage and the love of sex so high above the love of God that we've become disappointed when we don't get sex, but instead we have to settle for God. No, what? No, man. You get the King fully, freely, and forever. So maybe you're here today and you're walking in the valley of divorce and that pain. We see you and we mourn and grieve with you and we hurt for you. And there's healing to come. We want to walk with you in it. If you're walking in a season of singleness, we see you, we love you, we're with you. We want to walk with you in it. If you're engaged, we want to walk with you. We want to walk with you in premarital counseling. We believe that it should be a necessity before you get married. And maybe you end up with like, if that's what it means to be married, it would be better to be single. That's fine. That's fine. And married people want to challenge you to be married, not just be not divorced. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes this morning? And we'll wrap up. I don't know, again, what you're walking in and through. Maybe today what you need is to bring your wife up here, husband. and let the lion out. Start to lead her towards the Lord. Well, I haven't left her. Good for you. Now lead her. Come to the altar, pray with her, confess to her, honor her by telling her that you've screwed up, man. You haven't done it well. You've neglected her. Wives, maybe you need to respect your husband, to see him as the gift God's given to you. I know it doesn't look like or smell like the gift right now, but maybe that's what God's given you. Maybe you're single and you've been wrestling for so long with your singleness, you're desperate, and you're about to say yes to something that will ruin the rest of your life. I want to challenge you to know what marriage is first. Maybe you're here today and you don't know the love of God, and the reason why is because you thought you knew what love was until divorce happened, and so that's how you see the Lord. He's better than that. There's no if or every and any cause with the Lord. On the cross, he died for your any and every cause, and he will never leave you or forsake you. And so the invitation is to say yes. Yes, I accept that love. I don't know that I believe it, but I accept it. I want to walk in it. You'll find salvation there. I don't know where you find yourself today. I'm going to pray. Sarah Kate's going to play, and you can come if you want. Small group can wait. That's fine. I'm going to pray for us. God, we love you. There's pain in the room, like there's hurt, and it's just awful. But you meet us there. Promise you would walk with us through the valley of the shadow of death. Not that you would call out to us, you would be there with us. So I know you're with us. Would you mend and heal where brokenness has caused pain? For those of us today who are playing house, because we cook together and live at the same address, God, would you call us to your view of marriage? For those of us desperate for a relationship that's robbing us of being present now, God, would you free us from it today? And would you help us to rejoice in whatever season and station we find ourselves in today? If we're single, that we would love you with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. If we're single and dating, that we'd love you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. If we're married, engaged, we'd love you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Reorder our loves this morning. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.